Jack Mercer stood at the edge of his property, watching with narrowed eyes as the construction crew poured concrete for what would become the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association's new security gatehouse. The foreman had assured him they were staying within the 5-foot easement that bordered Jack's land, but Jack knew better. His grandfather had taught him to read surveys when he was just 12, and the stakes Jack had placed last weekend clearly showed the truth. They were 3 feet over the line. This wasn't the first time Whispering Pines had tried to encroach on his 15 acres. For years their board president Eleanor Lake had been showing up at his door with gift baskets and membership applications. "Just think of the property value increase," she would say, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. "And all our lovely community events." Jack never bothered to explain that his family had owned this land since before Whispering Pines was even a blueprint on some developer's desk. He had no interest in their restrictive covenants, their mandatory landscaping requirements, or their community events. He was perfectly happy with his modest cabin, his vegetable garden, and the peace and quiet of his woods. But this time they had gone too far. Jack called out to the foreman. "You're over my property line." The man barely glanced up from his clipboard. "We have permits, sir. This is HOA easement. I've got surveys that say different." "Take it up with the board," the foreman replied, turning away. Jack did exactly that. He attended the next HOA meeting, survey in hand, but Eleanor Lake gavelled him into silence when he tried to speak during public comments. "You're not a member, Mr. Mercer. You don't have standing here." "I do when you're building on my land." "Our lawyers have reviewed everything," Eleanor said as she waved a hand dismissively. "The gatehouse location is perfectly legal. Perhaps if you'd finally join our community, we could discuss your concerns." The room filled with polite, condescending laughter. That night Jack sat at his kitchen table studying old property maps and his grandfather's journals. Something didn't add up. The easement Whispering Pines claimed was larger than what appeared in the original county records. He needed professional help. Margot Adams wasn't what Jack expected when he walked into her law office. The young attorney looked more like a college student in her casual attire, but her reputation as a property rights specialist had brought him here. "So they built 3 feet onto your property," she said, examining his documentation. "And refused to stop when notified." "That's right." Margot's eyes sparkled. "And you've never granted them permission to use your land?" "Never. I avoid them whenever possible." "Interesting," she said as she flipped through more pages. "Have you had a water survey done recently?" Jack frowned. "A what?" "Water survey. This area was originally wetland before development. I'm wondering about the water table beneath your property." Jack shook his head, confused by the apparent change in subject. "Let me explain," Margot said. "I think we have a unique opportunity here, but first we need to confirm something." 2 weeks later, Jack stood beside Margot as an environmental engineer examined a test well on his property. "Just as we suspected," the engineer said. "There's a substantial aquifer running right through here, and it extends under about 7 acres of the Whispering Pines development." "And the gatehouse?" Margot asked. "Sits directly atop it." Margot grinned. "Perfect. Now we can move to Phase 2. Phase 2, as Jack discovered, involved forming his own company, Mercer Water LLC. With Margot's guidance, he filed for water rights to the aquifer beneath his property, rights that, according to state law, extended to wherever that water flowed. "But what good does that do?" Jack asked. "They've still built on my land." "Patience," Margot counseled him. "We're just laying groundwork." The next HOA meeting was different. This time, Jack didn't try to speak. He simply sat in the back row with Margot beside him as Eleanor Lake ran through the agenda. When she opened the floor for new business, Margot stood. "I'm Margot Adams, representing Mercer Water LLC," she announced. I'm here to inform the board that you are in violation of both property boundaries and water rights belonging to my client. Eleanor's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose. I believe we've addressed Mr. Mercer's boundary complaints already. Not to my client's satisfaction, Margot replied. But more importantly, you've built your gatehouse over a protected aquifer without proper environmental impact studies or permits. That's absurd, Eleanor scoffed. Our construction was fully permitted. For the building, yes. But not for interference with the water table. My client now holds exclusive rights to that water resource. Margot distributed folders to each board member. You'll find all the relevant documentation, including the cease and desist order that was filed with the county this morning. The room erupted into confused chatter. Eleanor Lake's face had gone pale as she flipped through the documents. This is preposterous, she finally managed. We can't just tear down a completed structure. Actually, you can and must, Margot replied. Or my client will be forced to exercise his full legal rights, which include charging you for water usage. Water usage? We have municipal water. Yes, but your irrigation system, your decorative fountain and your community pool all tap into groundwater that now legally belongs to Mercer Water LLC. We've calculated appropriate retroactive fees for the past 5 years. Jack watched as the blood drained from Eleanor's face when she saw the figure on the last page. This is blackmail, she hissed. No, Margot corrected. This is property rights. But my client is prepared to be reasonable. Eleanor Lake was not one to surrender easily. Within days, Whispering Pines had filed a countersuit claiming pre-existing rights to the water and disputing Jack's property boundaries altogether. They've hired Blackwell and Associates, Margot told Jack over coffee at his kitchen table. Big firm known for burying opponents in paperwork. Can they win? Jack asked. On the merits? No. But they're hoping you'll run out of money before this gets to trial. I don't have deep pockets like they do, Jack admitted. But you have something they don't, Margot said, tapping the oldest of his grandfather's journals. Institutional memory. The next month became a war of attrition. The HOA's lawyers sent intimidating letters and filed motion after motion. They hired their own surveyors who conveniently found the boundary markers to be incorrectly placed. When Jack refused to back down, strange things began happening around his property. His mailbox was knocked over, twice. Someone cut through his garden fence, allowing deer to devastate his vegetables. Anonymous complaints about eyesore conditions started appearing at the county office, triggering inspections of his property. They're trying to wear you down, Margot observed during one of their strategy sessions. She had taken to stopping by regularly, often bringing takeout dinner as they worked late into the evening. It's working, Jack admitted, exhausted from the constant harassment. Then maybe it's time for our nuclear option. The nuclear option arrived in the form of Gerald Winston, a silver-haired man in his 70s who had once been the county's most respected judge before retirement. Your grandfather and I served on the volunteer fire department together, Gerald told Jack as they walked the property line. Good man. Principled. You knew my grandfather? Jack asked, surprised. Known your family for generations. Was there when your great-grandfather finalized the sale of the original parcel to Lakeside Development, the company that later became Whispering Pines. Gerald paused at a particular oak tree, running his hand over a faded blaze mark on its trunk. This was one of the original boundary markers. Your grandfather showed it to me 50 years ago. That testimony, along with Gerald's discovery of original deeds in the county's archive room, files that had mysteriously gone missing from the electronic records, changed everything. When presented with evidence that the original sale included specific covenants protecting the Mercer homestead boundaries, the HOA's legal strategy crumbled. The final blow came when local media got wind of the story. Historic family property threatened by HOA overreach wasn't the kind of publicity Whispering Pines wanted, especially when property values were already shaky in the current market. It still took 3 more months of legal maneuvering before Eleanor Lake finally conceded defeat. A few weeks later, Jack sat on his porch, enjoying the view. Where the gatehouse had once encroached on his land, there now stood a small stone monument with a bronze plaque, "This land preserved in perpetuity as a natural watershed buffer zone, by agreement between Mercer Conservation Trust and Whispering Pines HOA." Behind him the screen door squeaked and Margot emerged with 2 glasses of lemonade. "Admiring your handiwork?" she asked, handing him a glass. "Just enjoying the peace and quiet," Jack replied. "No more construction. No more Eleanor Lake knocking on my door with membership forms." "The conservation easement was a stroke of genius," Margot said, settling into the chair beside him. "They remove the gatehouse, acknowledge your boundary lines, and get a tax write-off for donating to environmental protection. And I get guaranteed protection from future encroachment," Jack added, "plus a seat on their architectural review board, though I never thought I'd want one." "Only for projects adjacent to your property," Margot reminded him. "You're still not an HOA member." Jack chuckled. "No, but I'm something they understand much better." "What's that?" He gestured toward the monument with his glass. "A stakeholder." In the distance, beyond the boundary line, Eleanor Lake could be seen showing a visitor around the HOA grounds. When she spotted Jack on his porch, she gave a stiff formal wave. Jack raised his glass in return, smiling as she quickly turned away. "You know what the best part is? I never even had to mention that my great-grandfather sold them the land for their development in the first place, with specific covenants about respecting the original homestead's boundaries." "You're kidding," Margot said, eyes widening. "You mean all this time? Their precious HOA rules?" Jack finished. "They exist because my family created them." Margot burst out laughing. Now that would have been a twist at the board meeting. Maybe next time. Some stories are best saved for the right moment. "Speaking of next moments," Margot said, suddenly looking a bit nervous. "I've been meaning to talk to you about something." Jack turned to her, noticing the slight flush on her cheeks. "I've taken a sabbatical from the firm," she continued. "After this case, I realized I want to focus on environmental and property rights law for regular people, not just corporate clients." "That sounds perfect for you," Jack said. "I'm looking for a quiet place to set up a small practice. Somewhere with character, away from the city but close enough to the courthouse." She hesitated. "I was wondering if you might consider renting out that old workshop by your driveway. It would make a perfect small office." Jack smiled, realizing that their months of working together, sharing meals and fighting side by side, had grown into something neither of them had anticipated. "I think that could be arranged," he said. "Though you should know the landlord can be pretty stubborn about his boundaries." Margot's smile matched his own. "I wouldn't have it any other way." If you enjoyed this video, please click like and subscribe. Your support helps the creator create more great revenge videos. Have you had a rough experience with an HOA? We'd like to hear about it in the comments.